I don't know how many people have grabbed an info sheet about Marc Ferguson, but in case you don't know it, he's the curator. Can't talk today. Of the Dalton Gang Hideout in Museum over in Meade, and afterwards we're going to have a drawing for 2 tickets to go for the hangout.
For the hideout, yeah.
Just for the hideout. Yeah.
In the museum, I mean, they go hand in hand. Yeah.
You need tickets to go through the hideout. So we're going to give 2 of those away afterwards for the drawing. All right. Is everything? Does that sound all right? All right. Let me introduce Billy Dixon. William Billy Dixon came to northern Kansas in 1864 and was a bullwhacker and mule skinner until 1869 when he began hunting and trapping along the Solomon and Saline rivers in northern Kansas. In 1870 he came to western Kansas to join in the Great Buffalo Hunt. A skilled marksman and frontiersman, he was very successful as a buffalo hunter, but in 1874 most of the buffalo north of the Arkansas River had been eliminated, which left most of the large herd south of the Arkansas. This was forbidden land as the Medicine Lodge Peace Treaty of 1867 gave all land south of the Arkansas to the Plains Indians. In the early spring of 1874, a number of Dodge City merchants and hunters decided to establish a trading post in the Texas Panhandle. By the spring of 1874, the adobe walls trading post had been built in the Texas Panhandle and was occupied by hunters and merchants from Dodge City. The Plains Indians were becoming more hostile to the hunters and decided to attack the adobe walls and kill all who were there. On June 27th at dawn, about 700 Indians attacked the settlement. 28 men and one woman were at the walls that morning. Billy Dixon and Bat Masterson were 2 of the hunters who fought gallantly most of the day and held off the Indians. The whites had only 3 casualties, while the marksmanship of the buffalo hunters claimed more than 50 Indians. Billy lived to tell this incredible story and went on to become an Army Scout for General Nelson Miles for the next 9 years. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for heroism at the Buffalo Wall Fight in September 12, 1874. The year is late 1874. Ladies and gentlemen, Billy Dixon.
Good afternoon, little folks. I hate packing all this stuff around. You seen some little sawed-off first sergeant around here anywhere and screaming orders out saying, "Get ready to go, we gotta move, we gotta move"? Have you seen him around here yet? You have? Well, next time you see him, ma'am, I want you to give him a message for me. You tell him that Billy says, "We ain't moving out until I say we're moving out." Too dangerous traveling during the day. Better to travel at night. Nobody can see you. Now, all you folks look like you may possibly be thinking about settling out here in this part of the country. Am I correct? Well, General Miles has instructed me that if I find a group of folks out here that may be thinking about settling out here, I've got to tell you a little about this part of the country here. It's still pretty wide open, wild land out here. There's many hazards out here. There's disease. There's prairie fires. There's wolves. Probably worst of all, some pesky Injuns. Now, I've been up against a few of them Injuns like that. Now, I want to tell you something, folks. You treasure your hair, you better know how to shoot. Y'all know how to shoot one of these guns? Y'all better, if you don't, you better learn how, especially you ladies there that got that pretty yellow hair. You know what Comanches like to do with that? They like to take a hunk of that hair and they like to put it on their bridles, especially that pretty yellow hair, ma'am. So, here I am, I'm working for the government again. Now, you see, when I first came to Kansas, back 10, 11 years ago, that's the first job I had. I found myself a job being a bullwhacker. Well, you don't know what that is. I drove a wagon. I was a mule skinner. Good one at that, too. Went to work for a fellow who was contracted to haul freight and such for the United States Army. Maybe this was out of Fort Scott, on up Fort Leavenworth. Occasionally we'd make a run over to Fort Harker. That's very near where the town of Ellsworth has been built here recently. I enjoyed what I was doing, but I'd heard all these stories about out here in the Wild West, out here in West Kansas, all the Indians, all the buffalo herds, millions of them as far as I could see. Them Indians that had come up and tried to attack you. I thought it'd be quite exciting to come out in this part of the country. I went on about my business, doing mule skinning, and one day we was up at Fort Leavenworth and the orders came in. Said, gentlemen, ready your wagons. We've got a load of freight we need to take all the way to Fort Collins in the Colorado Territory. I was as happy as I could be. I thought, I'm finally going to get to see the real Wild West I've heard so much about. We loaded them wagons up with supplies, and I bought myself a brand new big black sombrero, got myself a new gun, and I was ready to go Indian fighting. We took off on that adventure. Took us 3 months to get to Fort Collins. Unloaded our supplies. Took us about 2 months to get back to Fort Leavenworth. Then, in that time period, you know how many Indians I saw? None. You know how many buffalo I saw? None. I thought this was just a big story. People have been telling me about the Wild West. There was no Indians, there was no buffalo out there to be hunted. So we went about hauling freight. We'd moved to Fort Harker. One day the orders came in again. We'd heard that there was going to be a big treaty go on somewhere down the south part of Kansas. We didn't know if our outfit would be selected to go or not. But one afternoon, Sergeant came in and he says, boys, he says, get your wagons ready to go. He says, we got some top brass and some high hats from Washington, D.C. Y'all are going to escort them down to southern Kansas on Medicine Creek. I was so happy with the thought of this. I ran back to my mules. I grabbed them bridles and I was starting to saddle her. I put the leather work on them horses, them mules, and in my excitement, I forgot the mules hadn't been fed. Well, I accidentally got behind one of them mules, and since I hadn't fed him, he kicked me right square in the chest. Thought he broke every rib I had. Well, believe me, it hurt. If the sergeant or the lieutenant would have found out about this, they would have let me go, so I hit it very well. Went ahead and hitched them horses up, or them mules up, them wagons, and we took off from Fort Harker. Made Fort Zara the second day. 2 days more, we wound up at Medicine Creek. There were some pretty high officials there. We had Commission of Indian Affairs. There was General Haney. There was General Sherman. They were going to parlay with these Plains Indians and see if they could make them a treaty, thereby they could get along with each other. See, tensions were getting a little high between the Indians and the white man. The Indians thought the white man was stealing their land, stealing their buffalo. We set up camp and waited for them Indians to come in. Suddenly through the west, up on this hill, I'd never seen so many Indians my whole life. All their ponies was painted up with the nice feathers and the ochre paint, and their bodies were painted from head to toe. The long headdresses, they came war whooping down off that hill. We'd been informed to keep our guns put away, but have them very close, just in case. I think that General Sherman did insist on taking with us was a Gatling gun, kind of handy to have when you're treating with the Indians. Them Indians came war whooping down that hill into the middle of camp, pulled up their ponies, and everybody was quite tense. Well, those officials and the Indians, they had their parlay, and they decided what was going to happen was that for as long as the grass grows, the water flows. North of that Arkansas River was going to be the white man's. Neither was to invade either one's territory. Everything was settled. The Indians went on their way. We went on back to Fort Harker. I'd saved about enough money. I decided maybe I'd have about enough of this mule skinning business. I'd heard that the hunting business and trapping business is pretty good out in western Kansas. Bought myself a wagon, bought myself rifles and knives, found me a couple of fellows willing to go out to the Wild West. We commenced to trapping and hunting. We was getting $25 a carcass for red milk. We get $5 a piece for wolf, beaver, muskrat. Now them big shaggy buffaloes, we was only getting about $1, $1.50 for one of them hides. There was just too much work put in to make them worthwhile. But then, something happened back east that was changed the face of the prairie out here. Seemed like they'd figured out, somebody over in Germany over there had figured out a very economical way of tanning these buffalo hides. Suddenly, back in the east here, folks wanted them big old bull buffalo hides. The gentlemen like them hides, they make themselves big, nice buffalo robe coats. The ladies in particular like the cow hides. You know, you can cover your legs up when you're in them carriages out there on a frosty morning in New York City. They could also use them big bull hides as machinery belts. Back in the east, the buffalo hunt was on. We was getting $3, $4 a hide for one of them buffalo. The hide was the main commodity, although we could sell some meat. We were close enough to a railroad where we could pack up some of them tongues and livers, maybe a few hunks. But the hide was what we wanted mainly. The hunting was pretty good. I was making a pretty good living up there on the Solomon and Saline rivers. Eventually, the buffalo kind of run out. We kept moving farther west. We moved to somewhere south of Fort Hays, down on the Smoky Hill. Hunting was fair. Then it dwindled off. One day, I had to go into Fort Hays for supplies, and I told my men that were still out on the range that they had found plenty of buffalo skin, and said, I'm going in Fort Hays for supplies, be back in a few days. So I rolled in Fort Hays, and while I was there, the quartermaster asked me if I might have a few extra days, and possibly I could take a load of freight down to Fort Dodge, down southwest Kansas here. I said, why, sure. Paid pretty good. I wasn't too busy. So, loaded up their freight, and I hauled it down to Fort Dodge. Since I figured I had a few days to kill, I mounted up my saddle pony. Of course, you always take your saddle horse with you. I rode west down the Arkansas River, about 30 miles, 35 miles west of Fort Dodge. Came upon a rise. There I was to see a sight that I had never seen before nor ever seen again. When I topped this rise, from horizon to horizon, it was black with buffalo. Millions of the animals. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I hurried back to Fort Dodge and got my wagon and my mules, and we headed on back up to our camp at Fort Hays. Told the boys what I'd found down around Fort Dodge. We decided we'd move our camp, so we moved south around Fort Dodge. Another thing happened around Fort Dodge was to change the face of the prairie again. Seems like suddenly, almost overnight, a small town sprung up about 5 miles west of Fort Dodge. A few saloons, a few of those body houses, some restaurants, eventually a hotel. Why, this was turning into a regular little town. They decided they'd apply for themselves a postal permit. This is going to be a town of first class. They sent themselves a wire off to Washington, D.C., and they says, we're going to name this town Buffalo City. We want a post office. Well, Washington, D.C., they wrote back, they said, you can't name Buffalo City, there's already Buffalo, Kansas. So, in honor of Fort Dodge, they decided they'd name this town Dodge City. Pretty wild and woolly place now. Yes, ma'am. Yes, the wool was long and the ways was wild back then. Dodge City is nothing more than buffalo hunters' camp. A couple of years ago, I'd say the number of buffalo hunters in and around Dodge City numbered 2,000. That's just the men pulling the trigger on these big guns. That's not counting for every 100, 3 or 4 or 5 skinners. Can't cook, so you take care of your animals. Any time of day or evening you walked outside those buildings of Dodge City, you could hear the boom of these big sharp rifles going off. Usually every time that gun went off, the buffalo died. By the time the railroad had made it into Dodge City in September of '72, there was then already 40,000 buffalo hides stacked up against the railroad grade waiting to be shipped east. Buffalo hunting was good. Now you see, I didn't spend much time with slings, man. I have been known to take a nip or two. Man, I never gambled. Never saw the need for it. Also, man, I don't know if you dance, but I don't. Anyway, buffalo hunting was good. Making good money. And here about a year ago, the buffalo started running slim again. Fewer and fewer buffalo, more and more buffalo hunters. Of course, the Indian knew what was happening. They could see what was going on. Buffalo hunters out here just maybe taking those hides off them animals, leaving the rest of them to rot out on the prairie. Now you see the Plains Indians out here, their livelihood is that buffalo. The Comanche, Arapaho, Apaches, Kiowas, they followed them buffalo herds. See, buffalo's a migratory animal. Goes north in summer, south in winter. These Indians, they would follow them buffalo herds around, changing their camps every 3 or 4 days. The buffalo was everything to them. It was their food. It was their clothing, shelter, tools. It was even their religion. And believe me, Indians are not stupid people. They knew what was happening. They could see that their livelihood was getting ready to be destroyed, their way of life, as the white man approached. More and more we heard of buffalo hunter camps being attacked by Indians. Horrible things being done to the hunters. Fire and steel. I'll leave that to your imagination, man. I don't think we need to describe that. Even for a hardened frontiersman and buffalo hunter, it was hard to see what these Indians could do to a person. Last winter, it was decided that maybe we should look for new buffalo hunting grounds. Some of us boys weren't ready to give up the buffalo hunt game. We decided maybe we should head south that Arkansas River. That, as you remember, Medicine Lodge Peace Treaty in '68 forbid white men from going south to the Arkansas River. This was talked about amongst ourselves for a while, and we decided maybe we'd go out to Fort Dodge and ask the captain what his feelings were about this. A couple of the boys went out and they asked him, they said, what might your feelings be? Should hunters head south that Arkansas River? Well, the man, he asked a number of questions about buffalo hunting, about Indians. Once again, he was asked what his feelings might be towards our heading south across that Arkansas River. The general just looked at the men and he said, boys, says if I was a buffalo hunter, I'd hunt where the buffalo was. In other words, have at it. Well, we knew the Army couldn't protect us. They were forbidden from going south of the river. But since the general told us we could do it, we decided maybe that's just what we'd do. We decided we needed an outpost somewhere in the panhandle of the state of Texas. It was decided that some of the merchants and buffalo hunters would get together and we would make ourselves as buffalo hunters in our wagons to haul their freight down to this place. And they paid us a very liberal freight rate. Plus they said, we get down there and we find an ideal place for a permanent location, we'll buy your buffalo hides at Dodge City prices and sell you goods at Dodge City prices. This seemed quite fair. We decided we'd head south into forbidden territory, into the Texas Panhandle. The day we took off, there was about 30 wagons, about 45 men, merchants from Dodge City, Mr. Leonard, Mr. Myers, general merchandisers. A number of us buffalo hunters went. First day out, we crossed Crooked Creek, south of Dodge City. Headed on south through no man's land. Finally arrived in Texas. Then we hit the Canadian River. We turned west, rode upstream, about a day's ride, and there we encountered a number of old abandoned buildings. You could tell these buildings had been made out of sod. Some of the boys said they believed that a fellow by the name of Bent, I believe it was, maybe back in the 40s, had built himself a trading post to trade with the Comanches and Kiowas and Arapahoes. See, Mr. Bent's permanent location was in southeast Colorado Territory on the Arkansas River, Bent's Fort. Anyway, he had quite a fine business going there for a while, until the Comancheros decided that they would attack the place, and Mr. Bent thought the best situation was to head back to southeast Colorado. Forget about these Indians out here in Texas. Anyway, we examined these ruins. We heard that they had named this place Adobe Walls. We decided we'd camp at this place overnight. The next morning, a couple of boys got up and they mounted up on their saddle ponies and they headed northeast. They came back a while later and said they'd found them an ideal location for a new little settlement. We loaded the wagons up, headed north, and found this location, and it was ideal. A perfect place for a little community. Immediately, buildings had been commenced to being built. Of course, we had no wood, so we built them out of sod. On the north end, there was Myers and Leonard General Store. About 50 yards south of that was a picket building made by Thomas O'Keefe. He was a blacksmith. Perhaps the most popular building was the one just south of that, a sod building that James Hanner had. It was a saloon. Well, we decided that in honor of the first Adobe Walls that we would also name this place Adobe Walls. Not really made of adobe, it's made of sod, but who cares? Anyway, me and my boys decided we would head south to Canadian. We'll see what we could find, see how bad the Indian situation was, see where the buffalo were. See, the spring was late in coming. Buffalo were still on their south range. We went across the Canadian, perhaps 2 days. Made camp. I went out scouting for buffalo. Very few buffalo had been seen. One morning I got up might earlier than my compadres did, and I mounted up my saddle pony and rode on south, looking for those buffalo. That is when I heard it. I'd heard this sound before. It was unmistakable. It was a low rumble off in the distance, not unlike a train passing over a trestle at a distance. This was the roar, the bellow of the bull buffalo. It was mating season, and the buffalo was coming back. I found that herd of buffalo. I shot enough I could keep my skinners busy for a while, and I went back camp and told them boys, said, I got about 30 of them laid out for you. Y'all go down there and skin them buffalo out. I'm going back to Adobe Walls for some supplies. Plus, I had one man with me I'd hired on that had to get back to the walls. His other hunting partners were coming in. Him and I took off north. We got up the Canadian River and we found the darn thing in flood stage. Seemed like there had been a big rainstorm upstream. We thought maybe we shouldn't try to get across this river. We decided we'd unhitch the wagon and maybe just ride the mules across. About this time, a couple of the buffalo hunters come up and they said, have you heard of all the Indian attacks? We've been out of the buffalo range, we haven't heard no Indian attacks, haven't even seen Indians. Said, well, they're on the warpath. There have been a couple hunting outfits been massacred. Well, we didn't have to think on this very long. We decided that maybe if we left those wagons south that river and we crossed, we come back, we'd find there was nothing left of that wagon. What they didn't steal, they burned. So we hitched that wagon up. We rode downstream a mile or so until we found a place we thought we could pass that river. Well, we pulled the wagon in the river, and we got about halfway across. And we said, began to pitch a little bit, and then began to roll a little bit, and then my old mules, Joe and Tobe, got excited, so we took these big knives out, and we cut them lines off of them and let them swim to the other side. Of course, you know what happened to the wagon. Over and over and over and over and over. Finally lodging on the north bank of the Canadian, nothing in it. We'd lost our hats. Of course, we didn't have our 6 guns on, they were in the wagon. Lost our supplies. Most dearest thing I lost is my big sharp rifle. Still to this day, ma'am, it must be laying at the bottom of the Canadian and rusting away. Well, my old mule Tobe, he wandered up there on that shore of that north bank, and he just laid down and died. Don't know what caused that. Old Joe was okay. Anyway, us two and the mule, we went traipsing into adobe walls. Everybody was there thought we'd been attacked by Indians. You know, no hats, muddy, filthy, dirty, no guns. We told them what had happened, and they said, well, you're very fortunate. There'd been a lot of attacks on buffalo hunters. Indians on the warpath. Well, I decided maybe I should borrow myself a horse. Maybe I should go find my hunting outfit and tell them we should move back to the safety of the adobe walls until we see how this Indian situation will play out. By the time it's Canadian, it was back down to regular stage. I could get across it just fine. Rode down to where my fellows were and told them we better get back to camp. We loaded up all the buffalo hides we could. Then we headed back north, crossed the river, made it into adobe walls. All the talk was about Indian attacks. The strange thing is, nobody had seen any Indians. They were sneaky. We decided we'd hang around the safety of adobe walls for a while just to see how this Indian situation was going to go. Anyway, there was not much to do. Since we'd been gone, one more store had been added just to the south of the saloon. Raff and Company General Store. Mr. Langdon was the proprietor down there. He was selling guns and ammunition, food. They even had a restaurant in there. A couple had come down, Mr. and Mrs. William Olds. He come down to help run the store. She come down to cook in the restaurant. The only woman. Well, we'd done about all the target shooting we could do, about all the foot racing we could do. Now, see, my friend down there, a fellow by the name of Masterson, Matt Masterson, he loved to race the horses. We had horse races. I spent most of my time target shooting, honing my skills. I'm a very good marksman. Finally, we all got bored of this. Nobody liked sitting around camp with nothing to do, so we decided we'd head out for the buffalo range. We knew the buffalo was coming, and we hadn't seen any Indians, hadn't heard any reports of them, so we decided Sunday, June 27th was the day we were going to take off on that hunt. Well, that afternoon of the 26th, there was a lot of merrymaking going on. There was a lot of target shooting going on. Well, Mr. Lang says we've got one gun left. I said we've got a 44 caliber. No 50 calibers, no 45s. I said, well, 44 caliber will have to do until you get some 50s in. Anyway, Buffalo Hunter preferred the big 50 caliber guns. Anyway, I bought the gun and a case of ammunition. Then I decided I'd go on over to James' saloon, show him my find. Left case of ammunition in the store and took that gun over and showed James what I'd found. I found myself a brand new sharp rifle. Anyway, you see, Mr. Hanrahan and myself had decided we'd throw in on the buffalo hunts together. You see, I could shoot more buffalo than my skinners could skin, and his skinners could skin more buffalo than he could shoot. So we figured we'd make a pretty good team together. We decided we'd go on the buffalo range together as one big hunting party. Anyway, after the horse race and the whiskey drinking, merrymaking was all over with that evening. One by one, the lamps were turned down. adobe walls fell into darkness. That evening, there was 28 men and 1 woman at this place called Adobe Walls in the Texas Panhandle. The closest civilization was 150 miles away, Dodge City. I'd made my bed out by the wagon since it wasn't quite warm evening that June. Most of the boys did that. They'd make their bedrolls out by the wagons. A few of the boys went inside some of the buildings. They'd leave the doors open and let some air through. That night before I went to crawl in my bedroll, I made sure everything was where I knew it had to be. Took my brand new gun, very carefully laid it on the ground next to me and covered it up with a blanket. Didn't know what the morning to do, just started resting it. Things was fine until about 2 o'clock that morning. At around that time, a loud crack was heard inside the saloon. Mr. Hanrahan, the owner, he came running out. He says, "Everybody out of the saloon." He says, "That big cottonwood log or ridgepole was cracked." He says, "If that thing collapses, everybody inside is going to kill them." Well, some of the boys went down to the creek to cut some supports. Others went up on the roof to throw the thatch off of it, make it a little higher. Then the repairs were done, but the only thing was, we could find no crack in the ridgepole. Well, we fixed it anyway. Some of the boys went back and got their bedrolls. Me and Mr. Hanrahan had decided maybe we'd get an early start. We'd start packing up the wagons and head off to the buffalo range. We sent Billy Og down the creek to get the horses and the mules. I commenced loading up the wagon. Mr. Hanrahan was inside the saloon loading up the necessities we needed. Then as I reached down on that ground to pick up my gun, I looked off into the east and I could see something in the very early morning dawn. I could see a object, but I couldn't tell what this was. I watched these objects for a while. Suddenly, all these objects panned out, and from it went up one single solid war whoop. Now, war whooping will do things to a man's hair that are almost indescribable. Mine grew at least 3 inches and probably turned a little gray when that happened. At first, I thought them Indians were just out after our livestock like they usually did. Didn't take long to figure out that they weren't after livestock, they were after us. I took one shot with that Sharp's rifle and didn't wait to see where that thing landed. And I decided I would head to the nearest shelter I could find, which was, of course, the saloon. Got to the front door of the saloon and bolted shut. I beat on that door for what seemed to be like an eternity. Bullets and arrows falling all around me like hail. Then, that door flies open, I run inside, and behind me come an exhausted Billy Og. He had done outrun them Indians in a 200-yard sprint. I swear if you would put a timepiece on a human being, he would still hold the record for the fastest dash in front of the Indians that has ever been accomplished by a white man. We commenced throwing feed and grain sacks up around them windows. Those of us that were buffalo hunters, we commenced shooting. Up close, these pistols come in mighty handy. Save these big rifles for the long-range shots. Those Indians were so brave that morning as to come up, back themselves up, them ponies of theirs to that front doors of these buildings and try to kick them in. And they were good shooting with these pistols. Now you see also the Indians had this habit of, they had to retrieve their dead and wounded comrades. Well, this accounted for more dead and wounded comrades. Pretty soon them Indians figured out that they couldn't put up with the marksmanship of us buffalo hunters. They were shooting little Winchester rifles and Colt revolvers, bows and arrows. We kept backing them Indians off, backing them off. Now you see, we were in the saloon, we had no way of knowing what was happening to the rest of the people in the other 2 buildings. All we knew was there was gunfire going off everywhere. Indians were dropping. Indians had killed all of our horses, our mules, our oxen. One of the saddest sights that day was a little pony named Inez. Came wandering up all full of arrows. Now see, this pony had been captured by the buffalo hunters and given to Mrs. Olds. Well, Mrs. Olds adopted this little colt. It was a friend. Had the run of the walls. Even been known to go up and snatch a pie out of the window of Mrs. Olds, but that was okay. Somebody finally put the poor little horse out of its misery. The only other living creature outside was a darn old crow. Now see, some of the boys caught this baby crow and they tamed it down. Well, this old crow was flying in and out of those broken windows and making a nuisance out of itself. We tried to shoot him out. He'd go to the next building, they'd shoot him out. Finally, later on that afternoon, we backed them Indians off far enough that we thought maybe it was safe to go outside. We ventured forth and found out that one of our comrades had been killed in the building just north of ours. Myers and Leonard's store, Billy Tyler, had run to get some water and was shot in the back by Indians. We didn't know that the Shadler brothers, their hunting outfit, had pulled in up at the north end, and both the Shadler brothers were killed. Also, their big Newfoundland dog was found scalped. The dog must have put up quite a fight for an Indian to scalp him. So we'd lost 3 of our number. As close as we could tell, we counted 30, 40, maybe 50 Indians out here. Of course, some of them got away. The Indians had backed off far enough we felt reasonably safe for the evening, so we bolted ourselves the doors on the walls, made sure our weapons were clean. Oh, one thing that happened that day, remember I told you I bought a new rifle? This was a fine rifle, 44 caliber Sharps rifle. Remember what I told you I did with the ammunition? Left it over in the store. Well, about noon that day, I was running low on ammunition. Just so happened my friend Masterson was in the same building with me, and I told him, I said, you know, I'm running kind of low on ammunition. I said, Mr. Masterson, if you would please, would you run on over there to the store, it's only about 50 yards away, pick up that case of ammunition for me and bring it back. Well, Bat being the practical joker he was, still is, I'm sure, he said, well, Billy, he says, I would be glad to do that for you. He said, but I found it late that it is bad for my health to go to that store. Well, later on we made a run for the ammunition and got it all squared away. That evening, there we were. We were trapped 150 miles south of any civilization. Indians surrounded us. We knew what had happened if they found out if there was a woman there. This didn't have to be said, but all of us knew that you save one last round, if not for yourself, for the woman. We were not going to let her be captured by the Indians. I'm sure none of us slept much that evening, realizing what we were up against. We had estimated that anywhere from 500 to 700 Indians had attacked us. The next day, the sun dawned bright, not an Indian in sight. We were trying to decide what we were going to do. We knew we had to go for help. This is going to be 150 miles on foot. Later on in the morning, we saw some wagons, some oxen coming up the trail. Another buffalo hunting outfit. Now, you see, we'd erected a black flag on top of one of the buildings to warn any of the buffalo hunters coming in that there'd been trouble. Well, this old jolly German fellow, this hunting outfit, he saw that black flag and he thought, oh, them boys are pretty funny. They can scare us here, so they think they're pretty funny putting up that black flag. Well, about the time he started running into dead Indians, dead oxen, dead mules, every time he laid a whip of them mules, he'd leave a whelp on until he got into the protection of the walls. He also said he'd not heard a word about any Indians. He also offered one of his horses to one of our men if they were brave enough to take off up the trail 150 miles to Dodge City. Mr. Henry Lease volunteered for the job. He was going to leave at night, stay off the trails. Anyway, that evening we all shook his hand. We knew we'd never see him again. them Indians were out there waiting behind the hills. Well, the next morning after Henry left, it was another beautiful fall morning. Hadn't seen an Indian. Everything was fine that day. We went out and picked up a few Indian trinkets. Had to drag all those mules and horses off. They were producing quite an odor. The old crow was having a high time out there eating on all that dead flesh till we got it all hauled off and buried. On the third day, we had more and more hunters show up for the protection of the walls. We'd sent riders out to the outlying camps and told them what had happened. More and more hunters were coming in. Perhaps there was 100, 200 hunters, all waiting to see what was happening. Nobody had seen any Indians. About mid-afternoon, we looked up on a hill, it was pretty near a mile away, and 15 Indians were lined up there watching us. We knew they were watching us. There were more beyond the hill. Well, old Bat, being a practical joker he was again, he went and found himself a big 50 caliber sharp rifle. He says, Billy, he says, you're the best shot here. He says, why don't you draw a bead on one of them engines up there and see if you can't knock him off that horse. Always in for a good challenge. I took that big 50 caliber sharp and loaded that dude up, and I adjusted those sights up to about where I thought perfectly a mile was. Then I sat down next to that door at that saloon and I braced myself real good, cocked the hammer on that gun, set the trigger, found myself my target very carefully. Whoa! When that gun went off and the smoke cleared, one of them engines fell off his horse up there on that hill. Well, didn't take long for the rest of them to disappear back behind that hill. They did send a couple of their warriors up there to retrieve that body and drag him off the hill, but needless to say, that's the last we saw of the Indians. I do believe that was the day the Plains Indians named the Sharp for a Sharp's rifle, a gun you shoot today and it kills tomorrow. Well, after about 5 days that went by, we decided that Mr. Lease had not made it to Dodge City. Since we had plenty of animals and wagons and personnel, we decided that maybe we should make a run to Dodge City. Me and Mr. Hanrahan grabbed some wagons and some men, and we headed off up the trail. Saw no Indians all the way to Dodge City. When we got to Dodge City, we did find out that our man, Mr. Henry Lease, had made it to Dodge City. And him and a relief crew were heading down to the Texas Panhandle to rescue the rest of the people there. When I got back to Dodge City, I decided maybe I better think about this buffalo hunting business. There was good money in it. Now see, I wear my hair long, frontiersman style. I try to antagonize them Indians out there come do it. That is losing its allure as of late. I don't know if I should go back out on that buffalo range or not. Anyway, while I was wasting time in Dodge City, I got a message that General Nelson Miles wanted to see me out of Fort Dodge. I rode out to Fort Dodge and met with Mr. Miles, and he said, Billy, he said, have you ever considered being a scout for the United States Army? I said, no. He said, you would be a civilian scout and a guide. You'd be under the direct supervision of another Lieutenant Francis Drop Baldwin. I thought about this, and this was quite to my liking, and I decided I'd be away. A lot better be out on the prairie out here with a whole lot of guns around me than a few buffalo skinners who didn't have guns. I told him I would do that for him. Well, anyway, we'd made our first trip. This is all the government needed and the Army needed to go and attack the Indians. This was going to be the final attack on the Indians. They were going to beat them into submission. The ones that would not submit, they would suffer the consequences. The rest of them would be forced under the reservations. We headed south at one time to Adobe Walls. Mr. Miles wanted to see where this action had taken place. He sent a couple of his surveyors out. He had heard about the shot I made. It was a lucky shot. He measured that off at 1,538 yards, pretty near 7/8 of a mile. The Indians didn't realize what they were up against, these big buffalo guns here. Anyway, I suppose I better go find that pesky little sergeant. Tell him we're getting ready to move out here as soon as the sun goes down. We're going back into Indian territory. Now, you folks remember what I said? Especially you pretty ladies here with that yellow hair. You know. Comanches, ridgepoles, bridles, learn how to shoot a gun. Y'all folks have a very good day today, all right? Now, see you out on the prairie.